Welcome to the Book Binge. I am your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today we are talking about Goodreads for all the love and glory that we have to give to Goodreads. I am somebody who reviews basically every book that I read, both on YouTube and on Goodreads. The YouTube reviews are generally a little bit more free form, where I'm relying on notes and kind of just speaking off the cuff otherwise, like this video is to a degree. But my Goodreads reviews are more scripted, they're more thoughtful, there's something that I put a surprising amount of time and effort into, to the point that I'm actually several books behind on reviews that are waiting to be written right now because I have been working too much time on other projects. I have too many other things going on and haven't prioritized the Goodreads reviews. The point that I'm trying to make is I'm a reviewer. I review a lot of things. I don't know if I would call myself a critic. That'd be a topic for a different video, but I definitely do a lot of reviewing things. I have reviewed over 100 books on Goodreads at this point and on YouTube. So, you know, I have plenty of experience within this sphere over the last few years. But this brings up the question, you know, as far as reviewing on Goodreads, how good are Goodreads reviews? How good are their ratings? How useful is Goodreads actually? Like what do those things actually indicate? How should you maybe even utilize some of those in, say, your daily reading life if you're an avid reader? Like, if you're an avid reader, you're probably using Goodreads to some degree. How should you rely on ratings, if you do at all? Do any of these questions even matter in the first place? Who knows? That's the purpose of today's video. So let's just kind of jump into the topic a little bit more explicitly and discuss what I think Goodreads ratings are more or less supposed to represent. I think this ought to be somewhat self-explanatory to a degree, because Goodreads ratings are on a scale of 1 to 5, and it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have 5 selections for what you want to rate a book. You could choose to give it no stars technically, but those aren't going to appear necessarily in like the ratings averages or anything like that, so those get a little bit more complicated. For all intents and purposes, you have 5 ratings that you can give a book. That scale of 1 to 5. You usually have a pretty good scale, knowing that 1 usually indicates a form of loathing of some sort for the book in question from the reader who gave it 1 star, and 5 stars generally indicating something that's like a favorite or something that did really well what it was trying to do. But notice that I kind of gave 2 different definitions for what 5-star could be, and herein lies the problem with ratings in any way, shape, or form. Like, regardless of the platform, if it's Goodreads or not, regardless of if it's about books or not, any form of thing that incorporates ratings into part of the social aspect or is part of the critical aspect of those things, they have different kind of utility. They're at their core very subjective, fluctuating person to person based on the person giving the rating. As a result, people's scales, you know, in the case of Goodreads, that 1 to 5 scale, that can differ pretty wildly from person to person. In fact, I know somebody personally who basically never rates things above a 4 out of 5 or like 7 to 8 out of 10, because he works on a scale out of 10, and a lot of the things that he reads are like 5 out of 10 or below, basically. And like, that kind of makes sense, where like the average book is kind of in that 4 to 6 range, you know, that 2 to 3 out of 5 range. Like, yeah, average speaking, that should make sense. It should also be pretty rare for things to be an outright 1 and to be an outright 10. Although the irony with this particular person's scale, now that I think about it, is that instead of the standard deviation being like this, it's probably over here a little bit, where things fall more in the 1 to 2 to 3 star range than they do in the 4 to 5 star range. But in either case, the point that I'm making is I know somebody who like never gives 5s out and doesn't really give 4s out very often either, where like an 8 out of 10 book we joke as being a 10 out of 10 book for him, because he never gives anything above an 8 basically ever. But on the other side, I also know somebody else who rates pretty much exclusively 5 out of 5. And to be fair, this person, hello Patrick if you're watching, he rates everything 5 out of 5 if he likes it, and if he doesn't like it, he rates it 1 out of 5. So it's kind of a meme scale to that degree, but like, even in that sense, you kind of have to know what an individual person's scale is in order for the rating to actually matter or make sense. Without knowing an individual's tastes, the scores that are being given to any particular book or anything else for that matter are a little bit hard to gauge. In that way, scores make a good starting point of averages where you can look at something and be like, oh yeah, there's an average of this here, and like we can basically work from a foundation with those scores. But you also have the case of, well, what do those scores actually mean? And you need better reference point than we have when it comes to the greater average. At least that's my opinion, but we'll talk a little bit more about that probably later. There's also another little wrinkle in the mix when we're talking about Goodreads specifically, as we are for today's video, because Goodreads doesn't have any half-star ratings. That is just not a thing that this platform offers for some reason, even though basically every other platform ever has managed to find a way to allow half stars to exist. Competitors like Storygraph, for example, have half stars, and basically every major review platform for other media has them as well. Like, I use Letterboxd and Serialized and Backlogged and Music Board for movies, TV, games, and music, respectively. All of these platforms allow half stars. Why can't Goodreads, especially when its direct competitor that I know of, Storygraph, for example, has half stars? Who knows? Maybe it's because Amazon is a small indie company that doesn't have any money to actually implement a half-star system. I don't know. Without the additional nuance of the half stars, Goodreads averages also end up a little bit different than I feel like they could if you had a little bit, more wiggle room to work with there. If anybody is forced to give either a 4-star or a 5-star to a book that they really enjoyed, but like 4 stars too low because they just really loved that book, but they don't want to give a 5-star because 5 stars should be given to something more special than this book is. They want to give it a 4.5. It's like, well, they have to choose one, and that can skew the scale a little bit in either direction. So here we come to the next section of the video. There are two sides to the utility of Goodreads ratings, in my opinion, and ratings generally speaking, but especially on Goodreads because of that kind of lack of nuance. On the topic of averages, average scores, I think that this is like the most important factor, especially if you're on the writing side of things. If you are the author, just being able to look and see an average score, like, hey, if you're kind of in an average range for a book of your genre or whatever, you're doing fine. That's all that should really matter. Any of the individual stuff, it shouldn't really matter that much, and if you focus too much on it, it's probably not going to be super good for you, but the average is an important thing. Even as a reader, if you're like looking for books with good ratings, averages can be helpful if you have some context in there. Understanding where an average rating ends up is always going to be useful, and furthermore, understanding a ratings distribution is good, and this is something that I actually like about Goodreads, all of the other platforms as well, is not just being able to see what a book or a game's average score is, but where those ratings actually fall. Because if your average score is 4 stars, and that's because every single review is 4 stars, that's a little bit different than if your average is 4 stars, but you have a ton of 5 stars and then a ton of 1 stars. Those two kind of mean different things. And of course, this is pretty stark set of examples. You're not going to see either of these things unironically, but the point remains. A book where every single rating is 4 stars suggests like, hey, that's a solid book. That doesn't necessarily indicate that this is going to be the best book you've ever read, but it's not going to be bad. But if you have a lot of 5 stars, but then also no small number of 1 stars to kind of offset that, and those are the only 2 scores that are being given a book, and again, like I said, this is unironic, like you're not going to come across this unironically, it's just an example that indicates that that book is probably for a specific type of audience, and there are other people who just really are not for that thing. You're going to have people who really hate that book for whatever reason, and everybody else really loves it. And you have to figure out, like, kind of based off of your own tastes and the reputation, the association with both of those scores, whether you're going to fall on the 5-star side or the 1-star side, and therefore make a determination on whether you're going to try to read it. If you read all of the 1-star reviews and it's like, oh yeah, the thing that everybody hates about this book, or the thing that all of the 1-star raters hate about this book is something that I also despise in a book, you don't need to read it. So the law of averages kind of works here. And on that side of things as well, is utilizing ratings based off of kind of average sentiment, being able to go through and make those determinations based off of your tastes in accordance with broader trends in the form of ratings. This kind of goes in line with the distribution of how ratings are as well. If a book has a really high average score, but that's because it's a romantasy book and all of the romantasy heads like it because it's just doing the romantasy thing, but you hate romantasy, it doesn't matter how high that average score is. You're probably not going to be super into it if you're just not into that style of book. And same thing goes for any genre. If you're not somebody who has ever enjoyed a mystery novel before at all, and you go to the best mystery novel and whatever its average score on Goodreads is, you're going to look at that and be like, oh, hey, this is a really high rated book. Let me read that. You're going to read it, find it's a mystery, and you're not going to really like it if you just don't like mysteries. Again, pretty random examples to come up with, but the point generally remains. If you're not making decisions based off of where you fall in accordance with a broader average and knowing the context of that average, utilizing these scores isn't actually going to be super useful. So let's talk about the other side of the utility of Goodreads scores, not on the topic of averages specifically, but rather utilizing reviews and ratings in the form of individuals, and the individuals that are making those reviews and the individuals that are rating those books. This is a little bit tougher, generally speaking, because you have to spend a little bit more time with particular reviewers to kind of understand the scale. Remember, I mentioned earlier that if you don't know an individual scale, like how they tend to review books, what kinds of things they tend to like, if you don't have any of that context for a particular reviewer or for whoever provided any given rating, it doesn't really matter. If you don't have that information, it's kind of hard to know what that review actually means. Like, let's say you find a random book that only has 5 ratings and like 4 of them are like 3 stars or below, but Patrick liked the book, so he gave it 5 stars. You're probably going to give a little bit more weight to Patrick's score than maybe you technically should, because maybe Patrick's actual feelings on that book are more nuanced and might fall a little bit more in the 3-star spectrum like some of the other ratings on that book. But you just gave it 5 star because he liked it and that's how he rates books. If you don't know that about Patrick, that score throws off both the average score of the book itself and the way that you view his score. And that's something that I think is important. Think of reviewers on Goodreads like Patrick, of course, the GOAT of fantasy reviews on Goodreads. If you followed Patrick for a while, you understand his tastes. You understand the things that he does and doesn't like about particular books. You can utilize his ratings and his reviews in context of that broader scale for him to make a decision based on whether something is going to work for you individually or not. This is something that I do with all of the media, for example. On the side of video games, for example, most of the reviews that I watch on the video game side of things are like Skill Up, for example. His videos tend to be the ones that I like the most. I have watched a lot of his content for so long that I understand quite well where his taste in video games falls in accordance to mine. So there are plenty of cases where SkillUp does not recommend a game that I go ahead and buy pretty much immediately because something that he said about what that game is doing is something that I actually really enjoy but just didn't work for him. There are also cases of games that he just loves a lot that I have not bought, that I never intend to play, just because the things that he loves about those games are not things that I particularly enjoy. If you are able to follow a reviewer in books like Patrick or Ira Perkins, even though Ira's been MIA for a while, I hope he's doing okay. I really liked reading his reviews, or me in this case, any individual reviewer. If you understand pretty broadly where their taste tends to fall, if you understand their taste about a lot of different examples of things, just kind of broad scale, where they fall on certain things compared to where you fall on those things, you can use those reviews. You can use that reviewer's scores and what they say about those particular elements to determine where you're going to actually fall most likely. There are also cases of reviewers kind of knowing and understanding and making the reviews of like, this is something that I should like because it has these things, but these are the reasons why I don't like it. Or this is not something that I should enjoy because some of these things are not things that typically click for me, but I really loved it for some reason. You're going to have a little bit of variation on some of these things, but knowing where a reviewer's particular tastes tend to land in context in accordance to yours is a great way to find recommendations. In my opinion, that's something that I have definitely found to be true in a lot of cases. In the end, I think that you should be balancing both sides of the spectrum of utility of ratings, because each side is inherently useful in its own ways. If you understand the broader averages based off of a community, for example, if there's a book on Goodreads that has an average score of like 2.5 stars or something like that, that is really, really low by Goodreads standards. So like maybe that book is just actually bad. Relatedly, if you see a book with a rating that is like above 4.5 stars, an average rating that is above 4.5 stars, you should also probably look at that and be like, oh, that might just be an exceptional book, because even that's pretty high by Goodreads standards. But if you understand where averages fall, you can utilize those in that proper context to understand where you might fall. But you also have to understand the average of what it is that is working or what it is that isn't working about a book based off of a large set of reviews. And then you should also be using at the same time particular reviewers that you follow, that you understand their tastes in accordance to yours, to kind of help you make specific recommendation determinations. They're going to be both of these scales that matter. They both make a difference. They both have their own impact, and I think they are both important. So, at the end of the day, I guess what I could say is that, yes, I think that Goodreads ratings are useful if they are used properly. Just as with all things, there's some nuance to the conversation. I think that you shouldn't take any individual person's opinions for God's opinion or anything like that, and you should also not take anybody's opinion as the devil's on the other side of the spectrum. If you have a particular reviewer that you tend to agree with, that doesn't mean that you're going to agree with them 100% of the time. So they might like something that you don't, and they might hate something that you do. That's going to happen sometimes. But even if you tend to agree with somebody, just because they say a particular book is good or bad, does not mean that that book is good or bad. You should explore it for yourself and come to understand based off of averages where things fall. Other end of the spectrum also works that way. You should also know your opinions compared to others more broadly, as I've been saying here for the last few minutes, and understand the nuance inherent to that part of the conversation. If you know how you tend to fall in accordance to certain reviews, and also in regards to certain genres or authors or series or something like that, you can utilize information from individual reviewers and broader average scores, both of those in more useful ways, depending on whatever it is that you care about when you're looking for reviews. Scanning for a broader consensus, like an average score, can make a book's general sentiment a little bit more legible, as opposed to just cherry picking random reviews out of nowhere. And also, kind of an example that I gave earlier, 5-star majority reviews on a romantasy book doesn't matter if you really hate romantasy. And on the other end of the spectrum as well, something that I haven't really touched on up to this point in the video, is that certain books with a lower sentiment could also be being fluctuated by review bombs. And you would come to understand something like that by looking over the broader sentiment of like 1-star reviews, for example. I recently reviewed We Who Wrestle with God by Jordan Peterson, and, no small amount of the 1-star reviews of that book are pretty obviously just review bombs, people who did not actually read the book, or in almost all likelihood did not read the book, or at the very least did not read it in good faith. And contexts like that are also somewhat important for understanding the way that a book is reviewed. If a book has majority 1-star reviews or more 1-star reviews than normal, is that really because the book is more 1-star worthy than other books, or is it just because certain readers or certain book audiences take issue with that particular author? I think that some social dynamics are also important to reference in accordance with Goodreads reviews. So are Goodreads reviews useful? Yes, but there's nuance and there's context that you need to understand when you are using them. And if you're just taking a random cherry-picked review and using that as God in regards to a particular book, that's not going to help you, and it's not going to help anybody else either. How do you use Goodreads reviews? Do you follow me on Goodreads? Do you read any of my reviews? Do you read anybody's reviews? I know some people who just do not read or watch reviews of a book ever, period. That's just not something that they do. They just want to read a book. And that's totally valid as well. But if you have a particular strategy for how you view or use reviews on Goodreads or any other platform, I would like to hear some of that down in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching. For now, I have been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.